Good afternoon, Australia. Good evening, America. And hello to everyone listening on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. You're back today with Radio Toni, and we're tackling trauma with Tracey and Toni. Just a quick reminder that we have a free downloadable trauma workbook to help you sort through some of these issues, and it's available on radiotoni.com under co-hosts. And you'll also find the details about how to connect with Tracey and also how to buy her book, which is all about her trauma recovery and is a great little resource for anyone struggling with trauma or trauma-related issues. So we're running a little bit late today. It's good to know that everyone across the world seems to be experiencing email problems, tech problems, computer problems, and so we're just going to get on with the show despite starting late. Now, a quick reminder, Tracey and I are not psychologists. However, we have decades of experience dealing and healing with trauma, and our knowledge comes from a place of healing and walking through that healings in our own personal lives. We also issue a trigger warning in the hope that what we talk about is helpful and not triggering. If you are triggered in any way, please reach out to someone for some help. Jump on a call with someone you trust. Don't let it fester. Now, a little bit about Tracey, just to remind you, she's an international award-winning speaker and author, and also a qualified life coach. She has spent her life working with others and helping them to live their best life. And this is our series on tackling trauma, because we both passionately believe that there is healing after trauma, and we want to talk openly, honestly, and vulnerably about this topic. We feel passionately that this is what we should do. So, good morning, Tracey.
Good morning, Toni. How are you today?
I'm good, and it's afternoon. I'm terribly sorry.
Sorry.
That. Now, just to recap, trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event. And immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. The longer term reactions can present as unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, difficulty in forming and keeping relationships, and even physical symptoms like rapidly beating hearts, headaches, nausea, and even back pain. So this is why it's important for us to talk about this. We all now know that the body keeps score. Whatever you've been through, the body remembers and keeps that keeps that memory of the trauma until you work through it and heal it. So I want to start today with a special story from Tracey about trauma and triggers. So over to you, Tracey.
Thanks, Toni. You know, the amazing thing about triggers is that you never know which one you're going to get, because normally what happens in the moment of trauma, you have this experience where you're looking to attach to something really normal. You're looking to attach to something that you can make sense of it with. And so normally what happens is, because you're heightened and looking, you don't realize you actually store in triggers. And so for me, one of my triggers is seeing my dad cry, seeing my dad have any type of emotion is a really big trigger for me, because as a child, after hurting me and doing things like that, it was his reaction, and it never made sense to me. I have a lot of I used to have a lot of triggers. I've learned to really live with them and deal with them. But just recently, my dad's wife, because he remarried after Mum, has passed away, and he had somebody call me, because him and I don't talk very often, asking me to attend the funeral. And it was a really big moment for me, because Toni, as you know, I'm very loving towards people, and my heart felt for Dad. He's been with this woman for 30 years, and they had, by all accounts, they had this really real marriage that worked for them. But I just knew I couldn't go, because I knew that being in the presence of her family, being in the presence of watching my dad grieve, would have a lot of triggers for me. And I think that it's really important for us to talk today about the fact that when you have triggers, one of the ways of coping with them and knowing about them is actually not putting yourself in a position for them all to come up. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. Which is sometimes a little bit difficult to um, to manage in everyday life, isn't it?
Oh, very much so. Because, like I said at the beginning, you never know which trigger you're going to have. And other
Yeah,
people don't know they're triggering you. Other people don't know they're triggering you. So, I can see a guy and a girl across the street start a fight. They don't know they're going to trigger me. They don't know anything about me. But they can
yeah,
trigger something in me emotionally that can take a good hour to process afterwards. And it's really important for us to know those and to just do a little bit of self-preservation, a little bit of looking after self-care, so that we don't continuously put ourselves in those positions where we're exhausted having to deal with it.
yeah. Some of those things for the listeners, when we talk about a trigger, it's actually a psychological event. So it might be a smell, it might be a sound, and or it might be a situation, but it's something that you'll know it's a trigger because your heart starts racing and you have have a desire to get yourself away from whatever you see, feel, or smell in that moment. That's a trigger. And so it always relates to a past trauma, and it sometimes feels like a flashback or a vivid negative image in your brain, but it's because your brain has stored that trauma as something that it needs to protect you from. So it's just your brain saying, hey, watch out. This is familiar territory. And last time it wasn't a good outcome. Last time something bad happened, last time something terrible happened, and your brain's just trying to protect you. So as you heal, you need to understand that these triggers may come along and know what they are. The best thing you can do for yourself is to understand those things that trigger you. And for me, sometimes there's a smell associated with a terrible instance, and I have to really go, oh, there's that smell. And then the only way that I can move through that is to kind of stop right there and then, and I have to take some really deep, calming breaths. Now, my logical and rational brain understands that in that moment, I'm probably not in trouble. I'm not going to re experience that trauma associated with that memory, but it's trying to protect me. So it's doing its job really, really well. And as you know and understand your trauma and you start to heal, these little moments will be set that they're very trying. The first time it happened to me, it was incredibly scary. I had a rapid heartbeat. I started to perspire. I felt incredibly scared. And I think I was just standing in a street and it was a smell. And that smell triggered that reaction in me. And as I began to identify some of those triggers, it actually enabled me to be better prepared. So instead of freaking out in that instance, I began to be able to understand, okay, my brain's trying to protect me, it's trying to look after me. I am not in trouble. I'm okay. I need to just breathe and this will pass. And as you start on that process, it actually gets a little easier, but I don't think it ever stops, does it, Tracey?
Some of them won't. No, I think some triggers you can deal with and you can work through, but some of the big ones, and I guess it's, you know, Toni, I always say to people, working through trauma can be a lifetime experience. It can be
Yes.
residual. And if there's residual stuff left, especially if you've had that trauma young or really dramatically, like,
Yes.
a world event like 9/11, or if
Yes.
you're abused as a child, when your defenses are way down and you go into that deep shock, you can actually bury a lot of trauma for a really long time. So it can take you a long time to get over it. And I think, I think now's a really good time of the year for people to understand triggers, because we've got them all around Christmas. That's how media works. I don't know what it's like in America, but because I know they've got Thanksgiving coming up, but here in Australia we are Christmasing out. And you go in
Yep.
and you hear music, and you see the wrapping paper, and you see the trees, and all those things trigger it's Christmas, and it actually triggers spending, which is why they do it
Yep.
2 months in advance. And it's just a really good way for us to understand that the same triggering defense that does it on the positive can do it on the negative. And we just have to learn, like you said, those breathing techniques, those self-talks, working through with people, and just being able to understand that they'll be there, and that once we know them, we can own them, and then we can learn to control them.
Absolutely, Tracy. And some of the things I was reading in Wikipedia, that great knowledge, font of knowledge. And I was curious to know that there's lots of different triggers for people. So sometimes it's a certain time of day, i.e., sunrise, sunset. For some people, it's specific time of year. And as you mentioned, 9/11, for me, that time of year is actually three-quarters of the way through. There's two of them for me. One of is at the end of August, and the other one is three-quarters of the way through October. And I know now, even if I don't remember those specific events, my body reacts even when I don't remember. So I get really tired, really cranky, and really very much in need of time and space. And it took me probably 10 years to recognize that that was happening. But now I know that. Now I'm pretty careful with myself. I'm careful what I do, the sleep that I get, what I watch on TV. I make sure I get plenty of time out and walks on the beach. That works for me. But I didn't automatically know that that was happening until quite a long time after the actual event. For some people, it might be a sight or a sound, like a fallen tree, or if you've had a bad car accident, it might be a particular car that you see on the road. For lots of people, particularly children who've been abused, it's a person or someone who reminds them of that person. That's very hard for people to work through. And I know for many trauma sufferers, that means that they can't actually be near that person. And Tracy and I have had this conversation this week that we can heal and forgive, but that actually doesn't mean that you have to be in regular and constant contact with that person that hurt you. So you can live a full and fulfilling life. You can forgive, you can move on, but I want to give people permission today to say, you don't have to have that person in your life to have a full life, to be forgiving and to be loving, but you still don't have to accept that person in your everyday life. Do you, Tracy?
Absolutely not, Tony. And I think for me, I had people that came into my life and stole from me. That's what they did. They stole some of my childhood.
Yep.
Some of them have never owned up to it. Some of them never will. So there would be no reason to have them in my life. And in my book, I have a whole chapter on forgiveness. And one of the things I say is it is a logistical gift we give ourselves to no longer be someone else's story. It does not have to be restitutional. It's a condition that we accept, where we just work through what it cost us and what it did to us and how we can make beautiful out of that. But it doesn't have to be restitutional. In fact, true forgiveness always leads into a life of bold love, where many times the best decision you can ever make is to not have those people back in your life, because they will continue to harm you. If
Yeah.
somebody harms you, hurts you, or does something that breaks your heart, then if they can't change, they're going to keep doing it, because that's human nature.
Yeah.
So it would be crazy to think you have to do that. And I often find that with children, because if it's, as we know, 89% of sexual abuse is created by people we know. So they have to
Yes.
stay in that they have to stay around uncle, dad, grandfather, dad's best friend, whoever it is. So often what you
Yeah.
find is that when they're old enough to make the decision, they balk right out. They move across states, they move across countries, and they don't have anything to do. They don't go home for Christmas, they don't do anything. And I guess, Toni, with Christmas coming up, this is a big question, because some of these people have to face some of these people because of the other people they love and want to see.
And there's also that societal pressure to be with family at Christmas, to make happy families. And I guess Tracey and I want to encourage you today that you don't have to do that. You you are able to give yourself permission to not be in those situations. If
Mm.
all those situations do is cause you angst, anxiety, and tears, don't do it. There's no one is going to judge you for that, particularly people who've been through trauma and understand. The people that really understand and love you are going to understand that you just can't do Christmas with some people. And that's all there is to it. It comes back to, as you heal, understanding that you need to put boundaries around yourself and your life that protect the healing that you've strived for. Because let's face it, healing from trauma is not easy. It's tough work, it's hard work, and you don't want to have to be always going back and reliving stuff that you don't need to. You've healed, you've moved on, and now it's time to protect you and put those boundaries around your life that keep you living this beautiful, glorious, wonderful life. Don't let other people tell you what's right or wrong for you. Don't be pressured into going into situations that are not right for you. And I know this intimately. I was, and Tracey will understand this too. We've been brought up where good little girls did as they were told, were quiet, didn't speak up, didn't say, and were just a people pleaser. Guys and girls out there, you don't have to live like that anymore. You don't have to be a people pleaser. Once you heal from that trauma and you've done that hard work, give yourself the gift of permission to protect that hard earned healing, because it is. It's not easy to walk through. And once you've done it, you don't want to have to keep being triggered or being in places with people that you no longer resonate with. And the thing is that you are not responsible for other people's healing. Just because you've healed and moved on doesn't necessarily mean that the people in and around you have moved and healed on. So you actually have to give them time and space to do their own healing. And hopefully, one day you'll come and meet together again. But in the short term, if they're not at the same place of healing as you are, then it's pretty destructive to be around them. Again, both Tracey and I know this from very intimate personal experience with this sort of thing. And we know that you, it took a long while for me to give myself permission to do that, that it was okay to step back and allow them the space and the time to do the healing that they need to do, because I'm not responsible for their healing. I'm only responsible for mine. I'm only responsible for my thoughts, my mindset, and my healing. And I can't enforce my terms or understanding of healing on someone else. So, Tracey, particularly coming into Christmas, what are some of the ideas that you suggest, particularly to your clients, in managing things like Christmas? Because Christmas is a biggie for lots and lots of people. It's a big deal. And it can be very triggering for people who have family trauma of any description in any way, particularly if they've got to meet with, an uncle or a family friend that caused them harm. So, what are some of the strategies that you suggest, Tracey?
So, with my clients, we always work from the point of authenticity. And part of being authentic
Yeah.
as an adult is taking responsibility for your own life. So if everybody has to go to Nana's house, for instance, and the uncle is there that harmed you, or the auntie or the dad or whatever. Part of being an authentic adult now is actually you working out that's not okay for you to be there. It's not that
Yeah.
they can harm you any longer. It's that you have a story that you need to heal for you. Like, I find
Yeah.
often victims, especially of trauma that's been inflicted by other people, they very much become victims, and the gap between victim and survivor is actually making a decision that you matter to, and that what you want to
Yes.
do is important too, and that how you can work through is important too. And that was really hard for me, because many times in my story, when I had to speak up, nobody wanted to hear it, because it changed the dynamic of something very fake, but also very rewarding for everybody else. So, this is the
Yes.
challenge, right? This is the challenge. Your mum and dad have got best friends that live next door, and he hurt you. So, if you break that friendship up, mum and dad get lonely. So, mum and dad don't, it's not they don't want to hear, it's that it's very hard for them to hear. So part of what I
Yes.
teach is you have to become an adult. If you want to become a survivor, I'm nobody's victim. I'm nobody's survivor. I'm my very own story. I will not be labeled a victim, and I will not be a survivor, because I didn't just survive it. I have taken it, I have transformed it, and I am making it part of my own life. It does not own any part of me. And that's what we have to get responsible for. But like you said, Toni, and amongst all that, you've got to make some strong decisions. And sometimes it means missing a couple of Christmases until people realize, okay, Uncle John and Tracey can't be in the same room. So what do we do about this? Maybe Uncle John needs to go to Nana's and we can go there on Christmas Eve and Tracey flies in Christmas Day, or vice versa. I mean, I know even with my
Absolutely.
own children without trauma, as they're getting older, we're shifting Christmas all around. It's really fluid now, because all four of them have other families they have to think of. So, we other families, even without trauma, we do this, but it seems to be that when there's trauma, it's like you want to show up, and it's like you want to prove there's nothing wrong. And but in actual fact, part of being a mature adult is actually saying, you know what, hands up, I can't do this. I just don't want to be in the room with him. It's not Christmas for me. It's not enjoyable for me. It's not his fault, not my fault. I just can't do it.
Yeah. And it's also the recognition that that's actually okay, that there's nothing wrong
Absolutely.
with yourself. And I know that all, particularly people who've had childhood trauma, it's actually taps into your self-worth. So as your healing happens, your self-worth starts to increase. And it might take a while for you to have the strength and understanding to do some of those things, but don't be tough on yourself. You'll get there eventually. You'll get to make those decisions around what keeps you safe and your boundaries, and it will be okay. Again, it's so important to protect your healing. It's a hard one, and you need to put yourself first. Perhaps for the first time in your life, you need to think about what works for you, what decreases your stress, because your body has already been traumatized. You don't want to keep putting it back into a stressful situation when you don't have to. There's no law that says you have to go to family Christmas. There's no law that says you have to hang out with Uncle John after he hurt you. Nothing is set in stone. So do yourself a favor and protect yourself, especially around Christmas. For some people I know, Christmas in itself is a big fat trauma. It's a big fat horrible memory of family arguments and dysfunction. And so for them, their ideal Christmas is a quiet lunch with just the two of them. And they do that year in, year out. And a lot of their friends will say, "Oh, come and join us." And they're like, "No, this is our Christmas. This is what's important to us. We'll catch up with you over New Year." But for them, Christmas is the trigger, and that's how they protect their lives around Christmas. So, one of the other things that we mentioned before was how the triggers are associated with your brain trying to protect you. And just so that our listeners understand, when trauma happens, again, we've talked about this before, but it's that fight or flight syndrome. And because there's a memory around that trauma, your brain, the the brain is triggered, i.e., what you see, smell, or hear, and it puts you back into that spot. And it's a very real thing, and it can be managed. So, Tracey, some of the things that you've talked about with your clients about managing triggers, what are some of the things that are most successful for them? What's been a successful thing that you've advised people on that works for the majority of people? I know people are individuals and I know they all react in different ways to trauma, but what's one of the key things that is a go-to thing for you when people are suffering from multiple triggering situations?
Look, to be honest with you, Toni, there's a simple answer that's 100% effective for every single person I've ever seen, and that is talk it out with someone. To actually
Yep.
acknowledge it and take its power away, and then talk to somebody that can actually help you with it. So, for every one of my clients, they have dealt with their trauma when they've been able to tell me what it is, and then they've been able to tell me
Yep.
what the trigger was, and then we've been able to actually debunk and demystify that trigger. Because often, as you know, our brain is our best friend, but it always operates in the negative. So, Tracey, do not get close to Toni because most people reject you. So, she'll eventually reject you. So, stay away, stay away. She's inviting you for dinner every week. Be careful, be careful. And next thing you know, I'm self sabotaging our relationship because I'm so afraid of rejection. I become rejectable. And so I find 100% of the time there's only one answer, and that is that people actually have to come to terms with exactly what it is. And for me,
I have.
all along the time, when I found those points and I said, okay, you know what my problem is? I'm rejected. I'm so rejected. I don't know how to be accepted. Then, okay, boom, there it is right there on the plate. Okay, now let's talk about it. What are the triggers? The triggers are when people are nice to me. Wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's deal with that, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's trauma is so effed up, isn't it? Like it just rearrange what what would be in most instances a normal feeling or situation, and it completely rewires what we think and how we feel. And it struck me then when you said about that being accepted, and I think from my years of talking to people about trauma, and I'm guessing that this is probably true for you, Tracey, that's one of the keys. You feel easily rejectable. And even in your most healed state, I know that I still have to be careful around that because I'll immediately think that someone is rejecting or having a go at me when that's not the case at all. And if we hadn't been through that trauma, then we would have a much more rational response. And it's not about being rational or irrational, it's just a rewiring of the way that our mind thinks and the scripts that go through our heads. A lot of the healing for me has been around that self talk, rewording how I talk to myself and going, no, Tracey is your friend. She loves you unconditionally. This is not what that's about. And rewiring myself to go, no, Tracey has my best interests at heart. Tracey loves me, and this is where she's coming from. So it does take some work, but it does have real positive benefits to doing that because you stop seeing people in a negative light and start to see them in a more positive light. And particularly if those friendships or connections are close to your heart and that you want to keep them as lifetime friends, you become better at negotiating some of these wordings. And it doesn't happen to me as much as it used to, but it used to happen all the time. As soon as I got close to someone, I would be looking for the out, and I would be looking for the thing that would point to what my brain was trying to say, is that you're not good enough. Well, I am good enough. I am worthy, and I am a good person. And those scripts helped me deal with that unworthiness and wanting to get out of, say, a friendship situation. Tracy, are some of those things part and parcel of your healing too?
Yeah, definitely. Because remember, Toni, trauma always arrives unannounced. It's never invited. It comes as, that full-on guest that just shows up and next minute you're derailed. And that's why I'm really passionate about people. If you understand you're in trauma and you're triggered and you need to find some ways out, I'm really passionate about them working with professionals, even if it's just 2, 3, or 4 sessions, whatever they can afford. And because sometimes you have to have somebody who can say to you, listen, you're doing this. Listen, stop. Listen, people don't think like that. And it's, in some ways, it's not fair to put that on your family or your closest people. Or in many cases, for me, in my first stage of my marriage, I put a lot of it on my husband, and he damn near cracked under the pressure of it, because people are our resource, but our source is always us. So that's why I say, download the free ebook. And we've got Zoom. Look at us. We're not even in the same office right now. I've been on calls to America and Germany before you today. So they can
Yes,
pretty much find anyone in the world that they like and
yes.
work with them. The Americans listening to the show, they have the potential to work with people like us, and their dollar is so beautifully strong. It costs them a lot less than maybe even working with people in their own country. So, I always say, go and find somebody who has a story that you think, what, if they can do it, if they've done it, they could help me, because you need to become your own source. And the only way to do that is with some professional help of people saying, what, this is what you do, this is what you feel, this is what you heal. And then you allow everybody else in your life to resource that and re-encourage you and walk with you. Because otherwise, it's really long and hard for people, and my heart breaks, because especially going into Christmas, you front up at a Christmas party and you're expecting everybody to cover for you, and you're triggered because the boss walks in, or somebody else walks in with your ex-husband, or something like that. Nobody's professionally equipped for that. You need to know, these are the steps, this is what you do, this is how you cope. And that's why I'm a huge believer in people just reaching out and getting some help.
And I feel like I've said this so much this week, that the thing is that once you talk about something, once you shine the light on that darkness that's in your life, it ceases to have power over you. It ceases almost instantaneously as soon as you tell someone else and talk it through. And they're never going to judge you. If they're in a professional position where they're a counselor, therapist, life coach, helper, they are never, ever, ever going to judge you. They are going to listen to what you have to say. They are going to listen to what you have to talk about. There'll be no judgment. They will just listen and help you understand what's going on. And then those that are very good at their jobs will slowly take you through that healing process. But the first step is always to reach out and talk to someone. And it's particularly important at this time of year. I don't know what it is about Christmas. I don't know if it's the combination of the stress of present buying, the stress of holidays, the stress of wanting to be in a family group, or I don't know what it is, but at this time of year, people are hurting. The closer we get to Christmas, people in trauma are hurting on many different levels. So let's try and encourage you to reach out and speak to someone before you get to that point. Talk to someone and share the burden, because when you share that burden, it halves. Again, it ceases to have power over your life when you share and talk about what's happened, what it is that's causing you angst. Just a listening ear, talking it through with you and telling you that this is really a very normal part of people in trauma, that what you're feeling is very normal for someone who's been through X, Y, or Z. Just hearing that from someone I know was immensely helpful. So back in my darkest days, when I had my first major breakdown, the GP who sat me down and said, what you are experiencing is typical for a major depressive break. And in that instant, as terrible and bad and horrible as everything was, I went, ah, so I know, and I know that Tracey knows too, that there are benefits for working with people. And again, it's wonderful to have a significant partner that you talk to or a close friend that you talk to. But if you get external help, they're often able to take you to a place that others close to you aren't able to, aren't capable, and they hold you to account a little bit more for your own healing. And I've witnessed this with Tracey in particular and the work that she does. If you want to get through the trauma and you want to work with someone who's going to keep you healing and helping you, and who may be at times a little tough, but she will keep you to account in terms of your healing. And she will get that healing happening for you in a way that is most beneficial to you. So, Tracey, in terms of sourcing external help, what are some of the things that you find key for people to find the right person? And I say this because for me, I went through a number of people before I found the right person to help me. So I got little bits of helping and understanding along the way, but it wasn't until I found my key person, who I've been with for a very long time, who completely changed the way I looked, the way I felt, because she gave me skills that worked for me. Is that your experience too, Tracey?
Yeah, so I always say to people, look for a specialist. If I'm going to go on a diet, I want to look for somebody who understands nutrition. If I'm going to purchase a new car, I want to talk to a mechanic. So, if you're going to do some work, look for a counselor that has trauma in their package, or look for a mentor like myself, a trauma coach. Look for someone who actually deals with trauma. Don't just go looking for somebody broad. If you're going to a psychologist, make sure they're ones that understand trauma or have specialized with trauma. And you can find that normally through your community paper, through your community notices, through your own GP. Like I've always said, your own GP will have a lot to do with it. By podcasting and doing the stuff that we're doing, by just Googling it and having a look. The other thing I always say to them is, when you've found somebody, always have a conversation with them, which should be free. If people charge you for that first conversation, they are not heart-based and you do not want to work with them. And I always say to people, in that first conversation, you ask them a question they can answer, because if they can't give away for free some information, they don't have enough to help you. Like I have people that when they phone up and they say, Tracey, you actually answered my question and you didn't sell me anything. And I said, well, mate, that was easy. I know a lot more than that stuff because I'm a lot older now. We store the stuff up. So I always say for that, just go looking for someone who's an expert, somebody who understands trauma. Especially if you're going to work with a mentor or a coach, they should have lived through it. They should have resources that talk about it like you and I do. They should be people that know their stuff. And then the second thing is, make sure that they are available to you. Have that free call and see if you connect. And it's okay if you don't, and you'll both know if you don't. And it's okay. There's something like 18 billion people in the whole wide world. We're not all going to get along, right? So, I find that, the Americans and Australians, I find we connect quite well because we understand each other's culture. But I've been working a fair amount with some Indian women, and they prefer to do it in class. they preferred it because obviously it's all about cost for them. So, it's a completely different cultural realm when I'm dealing with people from India, because you've got 4 or 5 women in the group, so it's a bit slower, it's a bit different, but they're all very open. Whereas Australians and Americans, they like their one-on-one, they like that classroom type setting where it's just us, nobody else has to hear or know. So, it's important to find someone who can help you with all that. But there are so many people out there now, Toni. They just got to start looking and reach out.
Something else I wanted to mention to our listeners today is I've got a copy of a trauma worksheet in the under Tracey and our stuff today that just might help you identify some of the behaviors in your life that you might like to, as a prelude to actually going to see someone. If you're a bit, gosh, I'm not sure if this is right for me, just might gently help you work through and see that there are some triggers in your life, and it might help you clarify just what those triggers are around, and then set you on your journey of finding someone to talk to that can help you. And again, there's any number of people. Tracey's details and the links to her books are also on radiotoni.com under the co-host section. So please make sure that you, if it's not Tracey or I or someone else, just Google trauma therapist, trauma helper, and you will find someone in your area with that specialty. I can't be firm enough about finding people that have experience in trauma. For Tracey and I, we've both worked through trauma, so we have a personal understanding. Therapists who have done additional training in trauma, they're going to understand more where you're at, what your mind and body is going through, and that's really important. You need to be talking to someone who understands what it's like to feel the way you feel. And I'm telling you, once you find someone like that, the relief you feel will be immense. It's a brave step that you take in connecting with someone you don't know and telling your darkest secrets around trauma. But believe me, that first step is so worthwhile, and that first step will continue to help you move through and process your trauma. Everyone's unique, everyone's a little different, but you can get through it, you can get through it, and you can have an amazing life and live your best life. I don't want people out there to be walking around and being afraid of something that is part of normal life. I don't want people to be walking around unhealed and not dealing with their trauma. I don't want people to live a life less than what they're worthy of living. Every human being deserves to feel worthy. Every human being deserves to have an amazing life. And I know Tracey is with me here in believing that this is why we talk about these difficult subjects, because we've been there, we've done that, and we're moving forward. So, Tracey, I would like you to just continue with some of the reasons why you took on the healing of your trauma and what it's resulted in your life.
I guess, Toni, I had this moment where I ended up at an event and I came face to face with one of the 12 men that had abused me. And he was friendly and he was outgoing and he went to hug me, and I froze on the spot. I felt extremely nauseous. My body was freezing cold and then boiling hot. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I fled because I was in fight or flight. So of course I was going to hit him or fight him, or I was going to flee, and I fled. And somebody called me to account on it. My sister was there, and she said to me, "What is going on with you? You're always so damn weird. You're always so crazy. I don't know why you do this stuff, Tracey." And I reacted to her, because now I'm in fight, because I've had flight, now I'm in fight. So the net effect is her and I end up having this big argument. And I'm saying, I can't believe none of you care less about me. I can't believe, this is what I've been through. And most of my family don't believe all of my story. So that's been sort of like a real bugbear for us. But, that night in bed, I thought, he had never given me a second thought. His life had not been changed. He transformed my life. He did something to me that I was still carrying. But Toni, then I realized I was choosing to carry it. And I actually was choosing to stay his story. I was choosing to let him be an author in my life. And I got up the next morning and thought, I'm going to go and find somebody who can help me process this, because I don't want to be the plot line in someone else's story. I don't want this guy to be the author of my story. I want to write it. And I want to be a successful wife. I want to be a successful business person. I want to be a mother. And I am all those things. And I always say to people, if you make that point where you think, you know what, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I just want to change. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to uncover a yucky old scab that's going to have pus under it, and you are going to cry and you're going to hurt, but it will be temporal. It will be finite. It will be 6 weeks. It will be 4 weeks. It will be 2 months. And then after that, just like having your appendix out, you will never have any pain again because you've dealt with it. And I don't know why I waited so long. I really don't, but I just did, because I was caught in it. And from that day on, I never repeated that cycle. I went and saw somebody and I told them exactly what I'd done, and I said, I want to deal with that. And now there is nobody that can walk into my house and make me feel inferior. I've been married for 34 years in a marriage that's unaffected by the hang-ups of sexual abuse, which, Toni, is very unique. And I work with people every day to help them get to that place.
And I guess that's the thing that we want to drive home today, is that you might think you're unaffected by the trauma that you hide in the back of your mind. We're here to tell you there's no way you get away unscathed. There's just no way. Your body will react with either an inflammatory disease, a major illness, and you might think that your mind is okay, but your body will keep the score. And that's the thing we want to say today, is that you might think that, oh, I've got through this and nobody knows and I don't have to tell anyone, but there will be issues in your life. They'll either be mental, physical, or spiritual issues. There will be a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, promiscuity, any number of behaviors that can be linked to unhealed trauma. We know this because it's researched to the nth degree, and all the studies say the same thing. If you allow trauma to remain unhealed in your life, this is what's going to happen. And we don't want that for you. We don't want you to live a life less than what you deserve. And that's why we come on this radio show and talk about this difficult subject of healing from trauma, what it's about, what it does to you, and why you need to seek healing. So statistics would have said that Tracey would be an alcoholic, divorced, single mother, fractured and dysfunctional relationships with those in and around her, but she is not. And she had significant trauma in her life, like massive trauma. But she's not that. She is happily married. She has 4 beautiful children. She has an amazing set of 9 gorgeous grandchildren who love her to death. She has a worldwide business in coaching and therapy and helping people. She wouldn't have been able to do that if she hadn't allowed herself to heal. So that's what's important today. We're suggesting that if ever there's a time to heal, it's now, in the end of 2020, because I believe in the next 10 years, we are going to see a change across humanity. And if you're not changing with that change, you will be left behind. You'll be stuck in your old rhetoric. You'll be stuck in your old dysfunction. And we don't want that for anyone. We want a thriving, amazing, healthy, healed humanity. That's what I want for my grandkids. And I know that Tracey wants that for her grandkids as too. So
Definitely.
we're just about out of time. I'm going to hand over to Tracey and give her the last few minutes of our show. Thank you for joining this week, and I'm going to hand over to Tracey now.
So, guys, as we end today, I just want to ask you a question. If not now, when? If not you, who? If you don't make the choice to love yourself enough to heal, who else could possibly do it? And if you don't choose to do it now, while you're listening to this radio show, while you've got access to people like Tracey Horton and Toni Lontis, when? Because we
Mm-hmm.
always want to put a stuff off out of fear. But the minute you
Yeah,
face it, the minute you step into it, the minute you make that phone call, get that download, do that worksheet, the minute you start it, the fear will disappear. The fear will
it will.
disappear. So, as we round it out today, two women who have hearts towards you, who love you, just want to ask you those two simple questions. If not now, when? And if not you, who? Thank you so much for listening. Toni?
Thanks, everyone. You've been listening to Radio Toni and Tracey and Toni on tackling trauma this week. That's the end of our show today. We are incredibly blessed to have you listening live online across YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And we'll be back next week with another show, Tracey and Toni tackling trauma on BBS Radio. Over to you, TJ.